teaching starts with the heart and it ends with the heart. And I believe, Dean, that we actually don't talk enough about love in public education. That actually public education is an act of love by the community. That and love can heal, love can encourage, love can push, love can challenge, but I just don't think we talk about love because of connotations that move it into this uncomfortable place.
Sandra Herbst is the superintendent of River East Transcona School Division in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And I have known of her for a lot of years. So back when I was still in Prairie South and really trying to develop my assessment chops, if you will, Sandra and Ann Davies were kind of this dynamic duo, and many of you would remember them, who did extensive professional learning across Canada and the US. And so Sandra essentially was doing a lot of the things that I'm doing right now in terms of traveling and working with districts all over. And so she did that for many, many years, but at some point that just became tiresome, and she wanted to, utilize her leadership skills in other ways. And here she is in Winnipeg, serving as school leader. But we had just a really great conversation. There's so many things, like when you listen to somebody like this, who is so well-read and thoughtful, you just are trying to soak up as much as possible. And that's kind of how I was today in today's conversation. So it was just really exciting to hear her, again, as a little different approach than I have in terms of how she's thinking about things and how she's sort of trying to lead that school division in Manitoba. And once again, kind of shout out to Donna Miller Fry, who called out to me the fact that there's something special about Manitoba education. And I don't know, I'm still trying to figure it out too, exactly what it is. But yes, leaders in Manitoba and Manitoba's education has some really interesting elements to it and perspectives that is just a little different, right? And that's what these conversations are for, to try to uncover that, try to help us understand better what leadership looks like. So enjoy my discussion today, conversation with Sandra Herbst.
I've spent a lot of time in Nunavut, in communities across Nunavut. I traveled kind of from end to end, and we were collecting video on instructionally and culturally responsive assessment practices in classrooms. And likely you've been in these places as well, but Kimmeroot is a very small community. And when you walk out of any of those buildings, the mountains are right there. They're right in front of you. And then I juxtapose that against a community like Pangnerton, where you see the mountains are in the distance. I think about that in my own work as a senior leader. There are mountains that are they're just right here, right? And easily accessible. And I might think I've got to get through these mountains so that I can get to those that are in the distance, that I'm not quite sure the path to get there, but they're beautiful. And we should really spend some time uncovering and discovering and exploring those mountains. And what's, I think, the difficult part is realizing how to live in that liminal space between the mountains that are right here, the things that are right in front of you, and the things that are further away. Because if we keep those mountains at bay, and if we deal with the mountains here, and we don't kind of live in that liminal space, as I've just said, I think we're not only disadvantaging our relationships, I think we're not only disadvantaging our students, but I think we're actually, as senior leaders, actively unadvantaging them. And whether that's intentional or unintentional, because it's keeping those things, and I won't say in balance, everything has its season, recognizing that those big, beautiful mountains, that the pathway there is yet unclear. We need to traverse that. We can't stay at what's so close, because that's, I think, how we build relationship. I think that's how we show the folks who work with us in schools and in the other places across our school division that I'm not just going to, my leadership isn't just going to be in the places that are comfortable and known, that I too am going to explore those places and walk alongside you to get to some of that beauty that lies ahead. So that really speaks to me about around democratization of our work, that speaks to me about the equity of our work, but it also speaks to me about the beauty and the exhilaration of our work. And I think that's something that pulls us all together. Because don't we ask that of teachers every day? Aren't we going to ask that of next week? You got these kids in front of you. You don't know them yet fully. And yet we're going to ask you to do some things that are likely going to be uncomfortable. We have new curricular documents. We have a new strategic plan. So you go and do that, but let me deal with what's right in front of you here. That kind of alignment is going to kill the relationship every time.
So I love that. And so give me an example of, just speak more about that in terms of a practical example of how that sort of played out, whether in a positive way or a negative way, where you've been able to look ahead and help traverse that in in your own leadership experience or other things you've seen.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I'm going to speak to it from a big idea. And then, as you say, you push me to an example. If we think about systems that thrive, and I was really fortunate to be part of a co-researcher, and the research was published in a peer-reviewed journal around what is it that senior leaders do in order to accelerate the learning of their students. Because we're teachers, but we aren't teaching children. We aren't teaching our students. We are actually in the spaces with the adults who do that kind of work. And there were several we found, but the number one significant finding was that leaders those systems had leaders that didn't only say, hey, I know what that over there looks like. I've got it down. I can describe it to you. I can bring resources to you. I can tell you what it needs to look like, that beautiful space over there. It's also those systems weren't led by senior leadership that said, not only do I can describe it to you, but I can actually produce the kinds of structures and frameworks that will allow you to figure it out. So structures of professional learning, of professional growth, structures of inquiry, and so on. We're going to create those spaces, because when leaders stop there, with the research indicated, and my writing has since been kind of predicated upon, and my leadership challenges me to every day, is that you're actually abdicating your leadership. If you're saying, I know what it looks like, moreover, I know how to help you get to what it looks like in that beautiful space over there. But the leaders that were more successful were the ones who took the step and said, I'm actually going to model that in my own work. And that I'm going to go into classrooms and model it for you, although I do that from time to time. But that's not the main place of my work, right? But I'm going to model that idea or that ideal in my own leadership work. So let me give you an example. When we think particularly around personalization, and we think about what OECD is talking and writing about, and other large organizations like that, they're talking about personalization. They're writing about personalization, about how we meet the learner and I mean, I'm giving a very general paraphrase, but that work as well, that the idea of the learner being seen as this individual, and that they can express their learning in the ways that they'll be able to express it, best able to express it, requires us to unshackle ourselves, as we've been talking about for decades, from the idea that we're going to have all students show their learning in very similar ways. And so that requires us to then think deeply about collecting evidence over multiple sources over time, that notion of triangulation, which has been written about and actually is built into every assessment policy across this country, provincial assessment statement across this country. So that is a beautiful vision over there, that this student dean is going to be able to be a co-conspirator with me, his teacher, and he's going to help me to better understand how he can show me what he needs to show me in order for me to do the job that actually only I can do, and that is to evaluate where he is. And that's great. We have policies about that. Books written about that. There are webinars you can attend. There's personal inquiry journeys you can engage in. But how does that land where you work and live in a system where then the only way that they get information is through things that simply can go into an Excel spreadsheet cell. So they're saying you need to think about evaluation from this rich, robust, beautiful perspective, but don't look at me to do that at the board office. Don't look at me to think about our strategic plan or our divisional plan in any other way than the simplest kind of data that I can kind of distill and put into a spreadsheet. That's what I'm talking about. And I think where we get tripped up is that in that space in between, that, what's in front of us and what's over there, because what's in front of us is an easy spreadsheet. What are the grad rates? What are the retention rates? What's the attendance data? And I'm not saying those things, and what's the provincial assessment scores? Those things are important. I'm not saying that they're not important, but they don't paint the full picture of the health of a system, the health and well-being of a system. I would say 2 tests, an exam, and an essay doesn't paint the full picture of what a student knows and is able to do in a course, an area. So how can we play together in this space in between? And that's a practical example. So how do we as senior administration also bring in data points through observations, also bring in data points through conversations, along with those more quantitative? That requires a leadership that requires leadership that is open to shaking hands with ambiguity. And that's the liminal space between the mountains here and the mountains there.
And
So you can see the bigger picture, but you do a practical example.
yeah, and I like that. And I guess where my thinking goes as I think about leadership across Canada, whatever, is that example you describe also requires some degree of not only transparency for others to be able to see what is it that you're doing that is modeling what we're asking others to do, but also some degree of relationship, because people might not see that, right? So when you're saying, I'm going to, as I model that idea of triangulation and multiple data sources and anecdotes and stories that help shape the work that you do, some people don't see that easily. And so it requires some degree of you actually calling out, saying, here's what we did here. And the challenge of that I think of is, all right, if you're talking about, I work in some places, I was in Southern Alberta a couple of weeks ago, and there's some smaller school divisions there, got 20 schools or something like that. Like that's easier for leaders to have relationships because they know people by name. Then I go to Ontario and places like TDSB that have 530 schools. And again, I get it. It's a bit of a separate conversation. You're kind of in this maybe sweet spot of a school division that's not massive, but it's still relatively big. And so I guess the challenge I'm asking you is what structures do you actually put in place so that the people that you serve can actually see what you are trying to model?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
Totally.
because I think there's some things you have to do intentionally to make that. It's not just, all right, I'm going to do this, but others saying, I don't know what she does, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think and I would say, I think whether the size of the school system is large or small, the mountains that are in front of us, the things that are urgent and emergent often take our attention in ways so that we can never get to place. I'm going to respond to that, but I just want to, Dean, if it's okay, I want to connect with something that you said about in the absence of relationships. You're absolutely right.
Sure.
One of the things that I think about is, and I was working in Ontario in a large system, and we were inquiring into, and I was supporting them around the idea of how is it that school leaders can give, best feedback to school staff. And so when we think about feedback, and I'm not talking about evaluative feedback, but I'm talking about how can a school leader replay what they have just seen without judgment for that teacher's active interpretation of the data. And so I was embedded in that system for a number of years, modeled it. I walked with principals and the superintendents and the director, and they were very much committed to that because they saw it as a relationship building piece. And I would say, I may get the number of months into the work, but it was in the double digits. It was like 2.5 years into the work. And there was a principal of a senior year school, of a secondary school, who said to me very vulnerably and honestly in front of administration, like, Sandra, I don't actually believe that I am new to the school. I've only been there a couple of years. It's been a bit of a tricky go. I don't think I have the relationship yet to do what we're talking about. And what we were talking about was really just, I'm going to walk through your classroom. Tell me what you want me to observe. Tell me the kind of data you want me to collect, and then I'll present the data to you and ask you a couple questions about that. I'm not going to make a judgment about it because you're going to help me interpret it. But that's another conversation for another time. So she said to me, excuse me, I don't think I have that kind of relationship yet to make that happen. And I said to her, but what if that's exactly what is going to build the relationship? And that's what I appreciate when you said that, because I think that it is easy for us to say, I don't yet have a relationship with X, whether X is a group, whether X is an individual. So I'm not going to be able to do these tricky things. But what I'm saying is, what if doing these tricky things, what about living in that liminal space is actually what's going to build the relationship? If you wait for that relationship, and I think we use that word a lot in
Sure.
education, and I don't actually agree on what that means or really understand it in a very disciplined way. But anyways, if I'm going to wait for that relationship, this is never going to happen. But actually, if I see this as building the relationship, that propels me into action. So
Yeah, no. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah.
and so to your other question about how do people do this work in systems, whether large or small, I think you have to think about your sphere of influence and about how that ripples out to others. So for example, and we were together in Newfoundland recently, we shared, our senior team shared some of the structures that we bring to bear in order to create spaces of well-being by preparing folks to be able to do their jobs and to feel confident in it. And one of the things that we do in our system very deliberately is whenever we gather with our principals and our vice principals and our directors and our managers and our consultants, we actually make our work visible. There's a section in our meetings that's called making our work visible. Because to the point that you're making, people can't see what they can't see.
That's right.
But they can begin to pay attention to things that they have been alerted to. And that's just one really simple response to a complex question. But it actually means that we have to not just use the word transparency and say, I'm going to do this to be transparent, but I have to talk about why is what I am doing being transparent. So it's
Right.
kind of the thinking behind the thinking. It's that metacognitive way of being with folks. And I think that's one of the ways that we can make that happen. Surely we can make that happen, being visible and all those things that people say. And then you hit the board office and you have a call with legal counsel and you have an issue and that's shot to heck.
Yeah.
But how is it that in the structures that you have with people that already are diarized and identified, how do you deliberately make your work visible? I think that's possible to do in the
Yeah.
places and spaces that are already identified.
Well, I love that idea of just like building it in. And then it's just a habit of each
Right.
time we meet, I show you a thing. And part of when I show you the thing, it's here's where I'm stuck. Like it's not going right now, but I'm working towards this. I mean, it's anything you want to do, whether it's health, fitness, or you have to be intentional about it and
Right.
build these habits in. Because again, it's one of these. And in fact, when you said that about relationship, I just looked up on my blog because I wrote a blog post a while back called, "And what do you mean by relationships?"
I know.
Because to your point, we say it's all about relationships. All right. So if it's all about relationships, what the heck does that mean? And what does that look like as a teacher with a student versus parents versus all of these relationships? They don't all get navigated in the same way. And there's some nuance there. And anyway, I think it's fascinating. Here we are. We're about 18 minutes into this recording. And I just actually sneakily pressed record midway through a start of it. So we had this really robust conversation actually before I press record about political structures, which, you know, I never know how do people find that fascinating. See, I do, and you do as well, because you have unlike probably a lot of school leaders, a more pan-Canadian understanding because of the work that you've done in the past. And you understand that. I don't know the degree to which you're fascinated by it. I am. I think it's telling.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit. I just want you to talk a little bit more about the Manitoba experience, because a couple things. Number one, a former guest of mine, and I don't know if she's Donna Miller Fry. I'm not sure if you cross paths with Donna, but she spoke about the fact on the podcast. She said, I think Manitoba's got it right in terms of the structure. And she didn't necessarily put any specific markers as to why she believed that, but you kind of reiterated that, because Manitoba has a couple of unique structures right now in place. Number one, the fact that it has an NDP government, for whatever that means. It's not always had that, because you guys are like everybody's flip flop, but also you have the only province by which local boards can levy tax and have some control over that. And again, whether those two things are the factors, but tell me a little bit about why you think perhaps Manitoba has a different feel, if you will, around education that you would probably highlight as maybe getting it right.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, our license plates say friendly Manitoba, and we take that seriously. So we try to kind of live up to that aspiration every day. And what I'm going to share with you is it's my perspective. But as you said, it's my perspective within the opportunity to work across Canada and internationally and see how local jurisdictions interact with one another, and of course with the government. My first kind of go round with senior administration was in 2003 as an assistant superintendent. So that's a lot of years ago, 22 years ago. And so I think what we benefit from now has a long history in Manitoba. It speaks to something that you said a little earlier, I think. And it is that we are different. We're not super big. We're not like BC. We're not like Ontario. So that notion of access, I think, is there, that if you need to connect with a deputy minister, it's easy to reach out, and our experience in Manitoba is, and I'm not saying that isn't the experience in other jurisdictions, I can only speak to this one, is that in fact that they respond and they get back to you. Not unlike perhaps in other jurisdictions, but we don't have as many school divisions as other jurisdictions do. And so we're a smaller superintendent group, so there are stronger connections and conversations that of course can happen. And not only have we been in the center of we're the real center of the country, yeah, you're right. You drive past that just outside of Winnipeg. But I think our politics has allowed us to stay a little bit more in the center. And I think there will be people who would be listening to this podcast and they wouldn't agree, but I would tell you from the perspective of education, I think about our documents like Mama Tuwisuin, the wonder we're born with. It is perhaps the best document that centers Indigenous ways of knowing and being and learning in the country. I think are about our appropriate educational standards. I think about our new learning framework in Manitoba. That work started under conservative government and continues now under the NDP government. So it's not something is put forward and then pulled back and put forward and pulled back. Right. There's this continuity. And in fact, some people might say, and again, some people won't agree with me, that those documents that were started under the conservative government perhaps had more ideals that people would connect with an NDP government. And the point is that people in Manitoba, I believe, are interested in getting things good and right so that we can live the good life, and they can set aside their politics for kids,
right,
which is so important. Again, I'm not suggesting that can't happen in other places, but you're asking what can happen here. And we're well networked, we're well connected, and it's been historically a place where schools have not been ranked, where scores have not been published. And that allows us to really dig deep into what really matters.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And I think, again, your perspectives are spot on and insightful. So I'm a homegrown Manitoba boy. So I remember Friendly Manitoba. I'm kind of keeping that as a stronghold to the culture. But again, fascinating to see how, because again, in every educational provincial body would love to think that it's not about politics. It's about let's just do right by kids. And of course, politics always has somewhat of an influence, but I think the degree to which it's impacted Manitoba perhaps is less than others.
Maybe.
And there we could probably, if we had more time or thought, maybe try to pick out why is that. But I think part of it is, I think I've always when I compare Saskatchewan to Manitoba, similar population, but more densely because they're all kind of focused Winnipeg and south. So just even proximity of people to be together, and yet large rural influence as well. Anyway, possible thing. So I would just want to take a shift and a little bit differently, because I first got to know you as I don't know if I can't remember if I was still a teacher or I was just newly into our school board office here, but I was in Saskatoon, and you were offering professional learning and around assessment. So you were kind of you still are, but you were a big deal around doing lots of traveling. So let's go back a little bit to that time. Maybe talk about how you moved from your role in school divisions as a leader in a school district to that role, and kind of how that all evolved, and just a little bit about that background. Because I just, again, then I did that kind of work later, and I'm doing that now. I'm kind of fascinated about your journey.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm often asked that question, so thanks for that. I earlier shared that I entered my first assistant superintendency in 2003 and enjoyed that work immensely. I was in my early 30s and had always been fascinated. I've always loved to write, and I had the opportunity to write with a couple of folks, Ann Davies being one of them, and Beth Parrott Reynolds being another. And I think that speaks to something that's actually really important to me, Dean. And that is that two things that we can do as leaders, that is allowing people to see things in themselves that they can't yet see. But we talk about that a lot. You've likely spoken about that with others as well. So that shoulder tap to say, hey, I'm thinking about writing a book. I'd love for you to write it with me, spurred me on more quickly to something like that. The second thing is, I think as leaders, we have the opportunity to create spaces and structures so that folks can be published, whether it is in a book format, in a blog format, online, and so on and so forth. For example, we are about to launch a magazine in our school division, and the first edition of the magazine, all the contributors are our curriculum and student services consultants. Because until you write it down, it actually is everybody's idea. And when you write it down and you put that little C with the circle around it, you connect yourself with that idea from a legal perspective. And more importantly, so often as educators, we are so busy doing the thing. You used the word the thing earlier, whatever I'm doing in my and executing my responsibilities, that I'm not stopping to write and to share these stories of practice with one another so that somebody else can pick up something or go online and say, that's me. There's somebody out there that's thinking and talking like I am. That's a beautiful opportunity. Or that's not me. Wow. Like, I don't agree with that at all. There's something in here for me to think about. And so that's really started for me, because as I often share with people who wonder about how do you get on the road, and I don't ever believe that I've been on the road. I mean, I was on the road a lot. This is what a 1,000,000-mile flyer on Air Canada looks like, tired and dried out skin. But I don't see it that way, because what it allowed me to do was be invited onto the lands and into the spaces of people who were thinking and asking themselves questions about things that I was thinking and asking myself about. But the opportunity to have something written worked for me, because I remember Terry Ruth German knocked on my door and she said, there's a lady from Hawaii on the line she wants to talk to you. And I thought to myself, oh, what poor family is moving from Hawaii to Manitoba? What am I going to do to make that not happen? Anyways, and she said, she said to me, I've just got my hands on one of your books. Are you interested in coming and speaking with our school administration? I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke, because that's the way to get your ideas in different ways, whether you do it on an online presence, in a book presence, or whatever. So that's really how it started. And the other thing to think about, and if you take a look at the books, and I've written many of them, what they do is they center the work of other people, because then when you have a voice, you have a responsibility for that voice not only to be your voice, but actually your voice is amplifying the voices of others. So the accounts, the anecdotes, the examples come from my work alongside other people, not just I'm republishing what they're doing, but I'm practicing with them. And that's why I don't ever think I was on the circuit or on the road, because I actually went into classrooms and to schools and into systems and did that work. So that worked for me. And the other thing that worked for me, quite frankly, was that I'd been a teacher, a school administrator, a consultant, and in senior administration. And so I could speak to all of those levels of an organization.
I'm fascinated by this notion of like where the writing piece of it, because I mean, that has been such an anchor for my work. And again, I mean, I actually was, before I thought I'd become a teacher, I was going to be a journalist. So I always had this idea of writing stuff down and still do. But I'm curious now when you talk about this magazine that you're publishing too, and how do you personally scratch that itch of writing still? So you're still doing a lot of writing? And again, and now this is going to tie back to, are you modeling this for your staff around like reflective writing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. So if I think about this magazine, I workshopped it with the consultants. And so we spent 2 full days, not 2 consecutive full days, but 2 full days
Sure.
going through a process of inviting them to bring their ideas and their voice to the written page. And what I did was, as I was taking them through that process, I actually wrote alongside them. So if I think about as this kind of in the box process, the answer is yes. And then through to the broader community, I write when I have something to say. I don't write every second Thursday. I write when something comes to me, and though we have I have a communications manager who actually reports to me. I do all of my own writing, with the exception of media responses. So if I provide an address, if I provide a message to the system, if I'm providing a message to the trustees, if I'm providing whatever, it's my writing, because I believe that you will be able to tell that it's not me, because I have a strong voice. Dean, you have a strong voice. Every one of our 3,600 employees has a strong voice. And if it's not you writing it, people will know that. So that certainly is a bit. And I would also say that when I think about the notion of writing is, for me, it's talk written down. And so when I think about the things that I write, I've talked them through with lots of people. And so when they see it then in written form, they're like, we had conversation, and see my impact on her thinking in that. And so I think for me, that's that process for sure. Do I have another couple of books in me? Absolutely. That season's not now, but to contribute to professional journals and so on, yes, that's continuing.
And that, again, to me, it speaks to this. You used that word, I think, before we hit record, was access. Like, this gives people access to you and your thinking or other people's thinking. I think about my good friend Chris Kennedy in West Vancouver, who does blog every week.
Yeah.
Like he does. That's just a habit of his.
Yeah.
And
Works
again,
for him.
and the benefit of it is that people know him, and they know, and again, for better, for worse, you put yourself out there saying, and people feel, and they do know him, and they say, hey, Chris, you wrote about this. I like this, didn't like that, whatever. It's a conversation starter. It has so many benefits. And I think about one of my stories that I tell is there was a superintendent / director in Saskatchewan that I worked under for a few years. And my wife, who was a teacher at the time, I mentioned his name. This was like probably a year and a half after he'd been there. And she said to me, who's that? I said, he's your boss. And she had no idea who he was. And again, he's a lovely person. So it wasn't a critic, but it was the fact that, like I said, and I wrote about this one time, I said, if you are a leader in a school division and you could be a candidate for undercover boss, you're not doing it right. If you literally could, people would not know who you were. And again, and I think there's a lot of ways in which people can make themselves visible. So I think we've just launched this. I think we've touched on this all throughout our conversation today, but there's so many ways. And again, back to your original, maybe I'm not a writer. Maybe I'll do video. Maybe I'll do a podcast, whatever. But the degree to which you can help people understand you and your work is pretty critical, I think. And this is where I think some leaders struggle because they're so worried about, and again, in a highly politically charged community, you might be scared to say anything because in case I get somebody upset. But boy, that's something I think is so critical. You got to figure it out. I don't know what that is for you and your community, all those kind of things. But if you are so guarded that no one knows who you are, all you're doing is creating that barrier between you and the community. And trust is very difficult to garner if you're not being somewhat transparent. So I'm excited. When do I get to read this magazine?
I will send you a copy. We're going to
I would love it.
Through the tune into the system, and it's an incredible way to highlight work of educators in our school division. And as there are in every school division, folks who are doing absolutely incredible work. I think one of the things that you caused me to think about and say, and I'm reflecting on this day I had yesterday with all of our principals and our first, and the trustees join us. We call it the leadership call. Is that as senior administration, so there are 4 assistant superintendents and 1 CFO, secretary treasurer, who works through a group of 6. We revealed our professional growth questions to that group of 100 and whatever, however many were in the room. And we talked a little bit about why that question was our question this year, because everybody in our school division, professional educators and other leaders, need to also have a professional growth plan. So it would be easy. So to the point about visibility, I might write about my professional growth plan question at some point and share that with the whole community. But even if I don't, there are all of those leaders that when they're talking about that, and if somebody were to say, we have to jump through this hoop, nobody else has to jump through this hoop. I know that I have principals, directors, vice principals, and so on who will say, actually, the superintendent and her team, they each have a professional growth plan question. They have shared it with us. And over the rest of this year, they are going to be revealing to us the things that they are doing in pursuit of that professional growth. And I think that's really important because you're right. I can't be in 1,600 classrooms simultaneously. It's impossible. I can get to every school at least once in a school year. That's possible. I can get to some things that are self-visible. Sure, that's possible. But I won't ever be able to be in front of people enough. And it's actually not my job, people, to be in front of those people. But my influence can be felt in these other ways through the alignment and the transparency that I create. And this summer, I had the opportunity to travel with my niece, and I decided to take a little walk. So she was just taking a bit of a rest. And I was kind of traveling up a hill, walking up a slight incline. Nobody else there except for a lady who was walking down the hill. And she was beautiful. Like, she was pristinely dressed. Hair was perfect. She was perfect. And when she walked past me, I said hello. And she didn't look at me, which is fine. But she was like, it seemed to me like she wasn't even present. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I looked up and there was a group of people filming her. She was walking this hill. And so I took a picture of her from the back and I shared it with my niece. And my niece said, oh, she's a social media influencer. And I thought, okay. And so we went out for dinner that night, and I understand the notion of social media influencers. I get it. But what really stayed with me was the conversation that I had with my 19-year-old niece, because I was wondering about things out loud. What does it mean to be an influencer, and how does that role contribute to our community and to democracy? And my niece said, can we just not have a dinner with you talking about these things ever? And I'm like, no, we can't. And so I was really trying hard to set my judgment aside and kind of lean into this curiosity, because we know that in education, and this is to the point about visibility, in education, we have this incredible opportunity to influence. We have the opportunity to help our students, help them see the world in ways that are healthy, help them come to know themselves and help them choose how to act. And the decisions that I make as a superintendent, the values that I mold, and the hope that I trust I inspire is this incredible opportunity to act, to influence. And even if I'm not in front of you, that you'll feel that influence by the way, the culture, the way we are in our
Sure.
in our system. And so that has really stayed with me. And we talked about that notion of influence. How do we influence through our leadership? It's not a groundbreaking question, but how we respond to that actually speaks to our visibility, even if we aren't present.
And I think it requires us to be educators as can be humble to a fault. Like they don't like
Yeah.
to think about themselves in any kind of way. And I mean, I asked this question. I think I even asked this question in Newfoundland. What makes you a good leader? Like,
Yeah.
I want you to say it and think about it, because followership is the only true metric of whether you're an influencer or not. Do people actually say, "Oh yeah, like she's doing the thing I think we're doing on that path"? And I sometimes think that in our efforts to be standardized, generic, to fit in, we don't call out those things that make us unique and celebrate those. And then it takes the community to sometimes call that out. And especially with young leaders to say, well, you're really strong. This is a really big strength of yours. You should lean into that more. You should amplify that. And I think that's this is why I'm curious about your magazine, because I'm hoping that it's going to reflect some diversity of approaches and thinking. I mean, I just love it when somebody shares like a thing like that. Never thought about that before.
Yeah.
That is something, a perspective I have not considered. And so I think there's things to be learned from the social media influencers. I mean, there's probably things that we don't want to emulate, because I don't want to walk around and not be present. But I do think there's a thread of intrigue there that I think all of us should say, why is that? Like, why do people care about these people? What are they doing? And is it just all surface, or is there actually something that we could extract from that and deploy in our own thing? I'm looking at the time and I'm already thinking, I think we need to do 2 of these at some point, because there's so much more to talk about, but we'll try to put a bow on our conversation today.
Sure.
I have 2 more questions before I
Okay.
kind of get into the quick hitters. First one is, I want you to speak specifically about what you're very proud of in River East Transcona School Division. So you've talked about a lot of things already that I could probably think, hey, looks like you're proud of this. But I want you to maybe think about something that maybe people wouldn't necessarily think of first when they think about River East Transcona, that you think, we're really proud of the way our district does this.
First of all, and not that this is the right answer, but it is the thing that I would say, I am proud of the people who choose to work with us. And I'm proud of the way that we enter into a relationship with one another. I think the other thing that I would say to you, Dean, and that people might be watching and rolling their eyes and saying, oh yeah, that's the political answer. I really think that what I'm about to say is as an even more political answer. I'm incredibly proud of the relationship that we have, administration has, and therefore the entire system has with the Board of Trustees. I am proud of the ways that our board leads and allows administration to do their work, and they understand deeply what governance is. They understand when we have to move into a canoe together, and they understand when we have to go back into our own canoes. And though we're all heading toward the same place, I got stuff I got done in my canoe, and they've got stuff that they've got to get done in their canoe. And I am very proud of that. And we have a very strong board and a very strong board chair who reminds us all of those kinds of guardrails. And I think the other thing that I'm very proud of in our school division, and I mean, I could talk to specific programs, but everybody has kind of like their bespoke kind of programming or programs, is the ways in which we believe that we need to be process strong. And how we fall back on process over and over again, and we define process well, and we trust the process. Even if we don't know where it's going to end up, we trust that process. So those are things that I think about that I want to share. I'm going to though talk a little future facing. We are intrigued by, and I am also intrigued by, the notion of democratizing learning, not as a phrase, but in response to the question about who owns the learning. Because we tell kids from kindergarten through to grade 12. You're in the driver's seat. You're the architect. We're going to help you design. And then if you lose your transcript, you've got to come back and I've got to sign another piece of paper for you. Or somebody else in senior administration has to sign another piece of paper for you. That structure actually is not about democratization. It still says that as an organization, we own your learning. And that speaks very clearly to me around Minopimatisawen, which is living the good life, and into even greater alignment with Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and seeing it as an act of reconciliation. And those are not just words I've just strung together in a sentence, but truly, we get to judge that it's clear the teacher has this knowledge. They take a look at the curriculum, the learning framework, and your body of evidence, and they get to make a determination about how close how close those two are in alignment. But at the end of the day, who owns the learning? And that is a really important question for me, because, and I'll just speak about this for a couple more moments. Part of my work in the past has been to work to support learning in refugee camps around the globe. Those are hard conversations, because not only you have to really think about how we talk about, so what's important, what's your learning destination? You got to ask yourself, what's actually life-worthy and life-giving learning? Because what do children in those kinds of communities need the most? And then who owns that learning? These are important questions for me. And that's something future facing that we are grappling with and that we will continue to grapple with.
Again, I think you've opened a pretty big can of worms in terms of that question. Because my follow-up to that question of who owns the learning would be that who owns the assessment? If that's all owned by the institution, then you don't really even own your learning, because learning and assessment they're intertwined. And so there's a really fascinating discussion of how's that going to work. So anyway, you have landed some provocative questions that I think require us to have a follow-up conversation, because those are big ones, but I love them. I love them. Anyway, so last question before I hit the real fast ones here. And everybody hates this question because it's hard. I get it. And I'm forcing you, one person, not all the people that you're grateful for, one person today that you're grateful for in the education. That could be a coworker, a mentor, somebody, unsung hero, whatever you want to describe it. We get to pick one person, and bonus if they could actually listen to this and hear a little bit of a shout out. As again, those are the parameters.
Yeah. So for me, it isn't a difficult response, but it may not be. There's no right response. You've asked me the question, so I'm going to tell you. It's my mom. It's my mother, and I'll tell you why. I actually deeply believe that children's first teachers, as most people do, are their parents. And then they move into this institution called school. But my mom, and my mom was a teacher. And she was not only a teacher for me as her daughter, but she was a teacher for many people in our community. And the why is she showed me that teaching starts with the heart and it ends with the heart. And I believe, Dean, that we actually don't talk enough about love in public education. That actually public education is an act of love by the community. And love can heal, love can encourage, love can push, love can challenge, but I just don't think we talk about love because of connotations that move it into this uncomfortable and, quite frankly, disgusting place. That's whether my mom would watch or not. I would tell you, because she taught me that teaching is an act.
You've now just added to the previous question of what is it that makes Manitoba somebody, because you're now the second person. The other one is your colleague from across the way Matt Henderson, who talks about
Okay.
love as well. So I don't know what that is, but there's something there. So I appreciate that. Thank you kindly for
You're
sharing that.
welcome.
All right. 3 quick questions to get
Yep.
you out of here. What are you professionally, what are you reading and or listening to that's kind of grabbing your attention?
Right now, so Dean, I'm glad we're having this conversation because we're going to have a follow-up conversation, not on a podcast. But my question is, my professional growth question is around artificial intelligence and its ethical, equitable, and sustainable use in school systems to foster problem solving, etc. And right now I'm reading OECD's latest report around AI and kind of buckets around that. So that's, to me, like, I want to go to those kinds of sources at OECD a couple of times, like the World Economic Forum. Those are the places where I'm going to really push my thinking. And so that's what I'm reading. And I'm hoping we can talk offline another time about my professional growth question.
Sure. All right. And then now for not professional work, what do you, maybe you, over the summer, you had some time, and I know it's going to get busy here quick, but do you have a little bit of a, I don't know, I say guilty pleasure, but just stuff you might watch just to say, to decompress? I can't always be trying to solve all the world's problems. Sometimes I have to just chill. Maybe you do that. If you do, what do you go to?
Well,
Binging,
okay, so
movie,
yeah,
whatever.
I got an answer. I don't, sleep has always troubled me. It's not a strength that I have. So sometimes I need to turn on the TV. The things that I'm watching right now is season 3 of The Gilded Age. Love it. Anything Julian Fellows. Looking forward to the third and final movie about Downton Abbey. But if you're asking me, what do I read the most? Anything mystery. I like Nancy Drew is kind of like my hero a little bit. And then next comes Trixie Belden. Those are names that age me for sure. But the Thursday Murder Club that debuted yesterday on Netflix, I've got a date with that coming up soon. So Richard Osman's work and so on. So Elizabeth George, anything mystery, those are certainly things that
Is it with women and solving crimes? I don't know. Like my wife is all of this too. It's like thinking, like, it's just, I don't know what it is. There's some kind of a hormonal thing that's going on, but anyway, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Last question.
Yeah.
Winnipeg. You got to give me a lesser known, like a little place that, like, don't tell me the Forks, don't tell me the Human Rights Museum, because I got those. But what's a lesser known place that I should check out that I might miss on a quick Google search?
You would definitely miss the Plaza restaurant. It's a little restaurant very close to our board office. I have been going there since I was doing my student teaching. That's what we called it back in the day, my stage. 4th year. They have the best lunch specials on the planet, and they're on Watt Street in Winnipeg. Don't want to miss that place.
Hey, never heard of this place. So I'm coming to Winnipeg in, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. So maybe that'll be on my list.
I'll take you for lunch, Dean.
Okay.
Well,
thank you, Sandra. This has been a real treat. I've been wanting to have you on for a while, and it's just great to hear it. Again, as I said, I think we have to have another one of these because there was just a lot of little things that I thought, oh, we should go deeper with this, but I was thinking about time. So anyway, thanks so much.
Happy to do that.
This is great.
Yeah, all the best, Dean. Thanks so much.